What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Weekend Wednesdays with Grant and myself, sponsored by PredictionStrike, where we go over all of the games from last week, some advanced stats concerning those games, who we're looking at next week. Yeah, we'll just go over all the matchups. Weekend Wednesdays, baby. Let's get into it. Not in my normal streaming setup right now
Let's
because
do
I'm
it.
dog sitting, but we Gucci.
It's all good.
Cool.
We got the first Thursday matchup here. I think we'll touch on the Seahawks later, but
Mm-hmm.
just looking at the Arizona Cardinals here, on some first read percentages, it seems like Trey McBride has been the guy most weeks, obviously. Marvin Harrison struggled a bit last week. There was obviously the video of his one bad drop that went pretty viral. I'm sure everybody tuning into this probably saw that. But outside of that, some extra guys getting some target share last week, namely Michael Wilson. And then obviously we had the huge James Conner injury that happened last week, which should clear a giant role for Trey Benson in this offense. I think that their running back room will be way more fantasy relevant now that James Conner is injured. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the way things go. But yeah, I think Trey Benson is projected around like 14 points. Feels kind of like a Jordan Mason type guy for the foreseeable future. I think that's his role as long as they don't trade for anyone else. So, what was your read on that situation? And are you starting any of these guys against the Seahawks this week?
Yeah, we were talking about it a bit last week, and it's hard to kind of say. Trey Benson, the role is obviously there for Trey Benson. It's yet to kind of be seen if he's actually good enough as a player himself, I think, to sustain the role that's going to open up for him. In which case, maybe we see a little bit more of a mixed backfield from him and Amari DeMarcado. I think that is actually potentially something that could happen. Which is why I'll be interested to see like the rushing props once I mean, I'm sure they've already come out, but I'm sure
I think it's
DeMarcado.
60, 65-ish for Trey Benson. I can look for DeMarcado.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what that is because that might be a good play on PS Pick'em this weekend. Is DeMarcado rushing yards? I
13
don't.
and a half.
That's not bad. Yeah, I mean it's kind of low, so it's hard to say whether or not it should be a point higher or a point lower, but that should be good. I think Kyler Murray rushing yards should be good. Just, I mean, solely in terms of that injury. So yeah, I'm interested to see how this backfield shakes out. I think if anything, like taking away James Conner is going to kind of force more intermediate play from Kyler Murray and maybe some more middle play or at least more passes funneled to the middle of the field, which might help. What's his name, Trey McBride owners. So I think it could be potentially a great week for Trey McBride as well, fantasy wise.
Yeah, agreed. I think the if you're in a deeper league, you're still probably starting Marvin Harrison Jr. But outside of that, the only guy I'm really loving this week is Trey McBride. Seahawks run D's been good this year. I'm not the biggest fan of Trey Benson in this particular week. It's obviously going to be his job for the foreseeable future. But he feels like one of those guys that people were hyped about because he looked good next to James Conner. But I'm not totally convinced that in an offense where he's just the lead back that he's going to have that same efficiency. I think it's helpful to have a different guy there that can kind of change the pace of things and loosen up the defense a little bit. So I'm not super stoked on him this week. That 65 and a half number might be an under for me on a PS Pick'em slip. We'll see as
Mm-hmm.
time goes on. But yeah, Trey McBride, main takeaway for me there.
Yeah, I would agree that Trey McBride is the guy to look out for this week on the Cardinals. Do you think the loss of James Conner is going to lead to more or less Kyler scrambling? Like my head jumps to more scrambling, but
Yeah, I mean, it might be more designed runs for him. I
yeah.
think if they decide to pass the ball more, there's obviously more chance of scrambling, but I think it'll stay somewhat similar. They've been in like very positive game scripts, uh, especially in weeks 1 and 2. They've been able to just kind of pound the ball in the second half because they've been up by so much. In week 3, the run game couldn't really get going because they were in kind of a tight game where they were trailing a bit throughout. Um, so yeah, I'd lean McBride. I like the Seahawks to win this game, so that could be a similar script there.
Yeah, I do too.
Um,
They got some injuries on the defensive side as well. Cool.
yeah,
Let's move on. We got Falcons who are playing next week.
they're
The
playing the Commanders.
the Commanders. Okay, cool. Um, Clearly a pretty mixed start this year. Obviously, Drake London, for people who drafted him, haven't had the season they've wanted from him so far. Are you concerned at all about that?
Yes, but not like to the point where I'm not starting him, and I still wouldn't trade him because I just don't think it's worth giving up on him right now when you're not going to get anything of crazy value in return. The biggest takeaway I have here is the week 3 numbers where Darnell Mooney finally played, and his first read percentage was pretty crazy at 36% there, higher than Drake London's. We saw that happen a lot last year. We saw a lot of games where Darnell Mooney seemed to be the wide receiver one, which is even more concerning if you're a Drake London owner. He still found a way to have huge games, though. Like, this more to me is just saying that Darnell Mooney is a guy that you could start in a flex in a deeper league, or if you're in a league with 3 flexes or something, like,
Yeah.
he's definitely a guy to keep your eye on.
And immediately
Um,
comes in, sees the highest snap share on the team too. I
yeah,
think it's pretty significant.
he's in he's in on waivers in a 12-man league that I'm in, so I think he should be on waivers in some leagues. So that's definitely a guy I would keep an eye on and definitely be adding right now.
For sure.
My biggest takeaway for this game will probably be Bijan. I mean, it depends on the Jaden Daniels news on the other side. I think if he doesn't play, Falcons should be in a pretty positive game script, and he should dominate this game on the ground. The Commanders' run defense hasn't looked all that great. Ashton Genty had his best game of the season, even in a negative game script against them last week. So I would be obviously locking in Bijan as like a top 3, a top 2 running back, which isn't really a hot take. That's kind of just the guy he is now. But that's probably the game script that I'm looking out for. Still starting Drake London and Mooney in a flex spot, as I
Mm-hmm.
said, but just less confident in this one.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm kind of off, I would say, of these Falcons receivers, I guess, for the near future, just considering the whole quarterback situation. Kirk got played last game. Phoenix looked terrible. But yeah, excited about Darnell Mooney the same way you are.
Yeah, Penix should be back. I'm not too worried about that long term, but
I
a
just think he
decent
might be
matchup.
bad though. Like,
Yeah, it's definitely possible. That was the worst he's looked in his career. I don't want to judge it too much, but I think next week will be a much more uh, positive script for the receivers taking on the Bills on Monday Night Football. So feels like a situation where they'll be trailing a lot in that one, and they'll be throwing the ball a ton. So I would keep your stocks until then. Moving forward here, don't have all the snap stuff quite yet because this is what we made prior to Monday Night Football. We do have the first read percentage from Monday night. Obviously, Mark Andrews had a huge game in that one. He was really the primary pass catcher. Zay Flowers is obviously going to be a guy that's pretty boomer bust uh, for eternity. They're taking on the Chiefs this week. A good run defense, not the highest on Derrick Henry this week, but it could be a week for Zay Flowers to kind of bounce around in the Chiefs secondary and create some huge plays. Outside of that, nobody super fantasy relevant for me here. I don't need to spend too much time on it. Lamar's obviously a guy you're starting. Zay Flowers, you can start in flex situations. I would probably not read too much into this Mark Andrews situation. And you're going to start Derrick Henry, but it's not a matchup I love for him. Anything else you got to add?
yeah, I think we should. I mean, I just wouldn't be super enthusiastic about Andrews from a fantasy perspective, from like a Ravens fans perspective, sure. But it's like I think we're going to see likely come back this week, which should be fun. I think he's someone to look out for, just considering like how low volume Andrews was over the first 2 games, even though he did have a big boom night last week. But other than that, yeah, I would agree. It's kind of the Ravens are funny for fantasy and for DFS purposes because it's pretty much just like it's always just going to be Lamar and Derrick Henry, and then
Mm-hmm.
everyone else is just going to either boom or bust. It's hard to say.
Yeah, you got to take some shots.
Yeah,
Moving on to the Bills, who play the Saints at home this week. Um, that's the highest spread I think I've seen in a game almost ever. It's a 16.5 point spread. Um, all Bills running backs. I think you could even make If you want to get extra sharp with this one, you could make the case that a Ray Davis or a Ty Johnson should have a good role in this game because if they go up enough, like all the running backs are going to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Just feels like that kind of game where the whole second half they're kind of just pounding the ball on the ground because they're up, I don't know, 24-3 at halftime or something like that. So Josh Allen, I think, has potential to stat pad in the beginning of the game and just kind of run crazy and do whatever he wants against this defense. But I think it could be a slower second half for him, given the game script. Not starting Keon Coleman due to that, not starting Khalil Shakir because of that. I would try not to start Dalton Kincaid, although you still could. But yeah, I'm all over the running backs in this one.
Yeah, Cook is like for me an absolute smash in this one. Like the
Yeah,
Saints
it's like
being
a
that
top
big of
3 to 5 play for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like I would even predict like 2 touchdowns from Cook this week.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool.
But this should be a smash for anyone on the ground in this one.
It was.
Uh,
Wait, can we go back 1 sec? I'm just looking at the first read. I mean, you kind of expect more of that split from Josh Allen, especially with the pieces he has. But it was good to see Kincaid get a little bit of that work back. Hopefully, that becomes more of a mainstay like it was 2 seasons ago.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I think this chart will probably be the one in the NFL that changes the most throughout the year. Like there's going to be different guys at the top of it. That's just how good Josh Allen is. There's not really like a guy that he's looking to on his first read every time. It's kind of just more what defenses are giving to him, and that's usually the guys that are having success. So, yeah, pretty crazy one. If you move on here to the Carolina Panthers, they're taking on the Patriots, whose run D has looked pretty good so far this season. That is about the biggest takeaway from their defense. Corners haven't looked great, but I think we should get more Christian Gonzalez in this game. He's questionable to play, which that's obviously a huge add in terms of the stopping Tet McMillan world. Other than that, if he doesn't play, Tet should be a smash. Should already be starting in everyone's lineup, even if he does play, but would get an even bigger boost in that one. Don't love Chuba Hubbard in this one, but I think the Panthers might have figured out a couple things on offense last week, and if they can carry some of that over and take a lead against New England, they should lean on Chuba pretty heavily. There's no other running backs that are really threatening that role too much. Rico Dowdle did get some work in garbage time in that one. That's how his snap share kind of crept up there, but Chuba's still the guy. I like him if that's how this one turns out.
Yeah, someone I actually really like this week on the Panthers is Bryce Young. If you're in that sort of quarterback situation, obviously coming off of a pretty hot week, we saw that against the Falcons, the Panthers can at least pose some sort of scoring threat. The Patriots do a pretty good job of squeezing perimeter wide receivers, so I assume we'll see a lot of design scrambles this week from Bryce Young, stuff like that, which obviously is great for fantasy. So kind of big on Bryce to over project this or under project this week.
Agreed. The Bears seem to figure out a lot of things last week on the offensive side of the ball. Defense even looked better. I will be boots on the ground for this one. They're taking on the Raiders this week, so that should be a fun one. Caleb Williams looked fantastic. He's been the QB3 in fantasy so far. I don't expect that to change all that much. I think DeAndre Swift is just kind of an inefficient runner and gets most of his work out of the pass game, and that's kind of where he's been most effective. So Caleb is just kind of a demon going forward. I think they should run almost all of their offense through him still. Obviously, a guy you have to start in any format in fantasy, I think, especially this week against a defense that just gave up like 40 points to Marcus Mariota. So it's a smash for guys like Roma Dunze, who's quickly proven to be the number one wide receiver in this offense and a guy you can trust to be even a wide receiver one in fantasy so far. He's looked like that. Biggest takeaway last week is probably going to be Luther Burden's kind of uptick in roles. Still didn't play a ton of snaps or run a ton of routes, but with those routes, he did a ton with them, had over 100 yards, scored a touchdown, and it seems like he could be the guy that they look to on some of those deep plays. DJ Moore still found a way to get in the end zone and kind of scam out 13 or so fantasy points, but not the highest on DJ Moore going forward. It wasn't like a great week that I would be super impressed with.
Yeah,
I
first
do
read
think
rate
he's
has been
a
concerning as well.
yeah, I do think he's a guy that gets moved at some point this season. Kind of depends on where the team's at, I guess, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's traded and that clears more of a role for Luther Burden, a guy they seem to be pretty confident in. But yeah,
Yeah,
Rome obviously A plus.
smash. Yeah. Shout out to Rome managers. What do you think about Monangai? Like week 1, 0 carries. Weeks 2 and 3 kind of seems to be steadily
Yeah.
ticking up. Obviously, backfield leaves something to be desired there. Do you think he's going to kind of see a bigger role?
It's definitely possible. I think people are kind of overrating his ability just a touch. I don't think he's like all that great of a runner.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a super late round draft pick. They seem to have a decent amount of confidence in him, which is good though. Like as long as you're on the field, he'll be getting some touches, which is important. I do think those 6 carries came towards the end of this one when they were up, and you're kind of just trying to run out the clock, and you're bringing in different running backs for different looks. DeAndre Swift is still the guy. I don't think he's all that talented. I don't think Monongai is all that talented. So it's not like there's a high bar required to take some carries away. So I think his role will probably creep up a little bit, but he's not fantasy relevant to me just yet. But a guy to keep an
Yeah.
eye on, I guess.
Cool. Let's move on. The Bengals, fantasy owners' least favorite team right now. Chase Brown is obviously having some trouble. Um, who are they playing next week?
Broncos, which is a nightmare matchup if you have Jamar Chase with Jake Browning at quarterback, and you're going up against Pat Surtain, who should be shadowing him pretty much everywhere he goes. Broncos defense hasn't looked quite as elite as I think we thought it was going to this year, just based on how good it was last year and the additions they made. Obviously, Pat Surtain won Defensive Player of the Year and everything. He's still great. But T. Higgins is a guy that I would probably be a little bit higher on than maybe even Chase this week, just based off him getting potentially an easier matchup. Obviously, Surtain could end up shadowing T. Higgins and just trying to take him out of the game, and that could entirely backfire. But Chase Brown, don't love him at all this week. Their run D on the Broncos side of things has been pretty good this year. At least it should be a lot better. I know last week Amarian Hampton kind of ran wild over them, but this is a defense that is supposed to be good, and I think we'll figure it out at some point. And this feels like a potential get-right game against a team that has struggled, and it's at home for the Broncos. So I guess you never know. But them losing Dre Greenlaw hasn't yet played this season. That's pretty concerning. I think if he plays, their run D will improve a lot, but he's out this week, so not to worry. Chase Brown, I mean, you kind of have to give him a couple more weeks. There's not much you can do. You're not really going to trade him for way less value than he deserved going into the year. There's still no competition, really. Like Samaje Perine played in garbage time. He's ran routes
I
and stuff
think,
like
yeah, I
that,
think he's
obviously. But
startable this week, honestly. Like,
for
I don't think
sure.
it's the worst matchup ever, too, just with like how the Bengals are going to need to be playing. Their pass defense is going to be pretty stifled,
Agreed.
or pass
So
offense.
maybe this is the week where he breaks out. But yeah, you're still going to be starting him. You're still not going to be trading him for pennies on the dollar. So you got to just ride it out, and hopefully this is the week where that move pays off. Moving on to the Browns here, they play the Lions in an early game next week. Quinshon Judkins played really well against the Green Bay defense, which
Mm-hmm.
that's about as high praise as you can get right now. The Green Bay defense have been shutting down everybody prior, all running backs even. So Quinshon Judkins managing to get 100 yards and a touchdown, super impressive for the rookie who's only been in practice for like a week and a half
Yeah.
by now.
I think he's like a must invest on PredictionStrike at this point. Like you're getting in at a good price, I think, right now because the projection wasn't insanely low against the Packers last week, just because they knew the passing wasn't going to be there. So it's not like he saw his like 40% jump on PS already. So I think, I mean, it obviously took him one game to assert himself in the offense. So he's going
Yep.
to be a mainstay there.
Yeah. I mean, they took 19 carries on the ground and he had 18 of them. That's about as secure of a carry share as you're going to find in today's NFL, where most teams have split backfields and stuff like that. But him getting 18 of 19 carries is insane. So a guy
Mm-hmm.
I'm super high on in all formats. I think he's a guy you probably start this week. Lions run D is pretty good, but he's proven to be kind of matchup proof so far, only through 2 weeks. But their O line is good enough that I think he should be able to have success against near anyone. The main guy I like this week going forward is going to be Harold Fannin, though. The Lions have struggled against tight ends. We obviously saw what Mark Andrews did a couple days ago. And as much as Cleveland would like to run the ball and as good as their defense is, the Lions just will score points. They're that kind of offense that is going to fight through any type of matchup and still put up 20-plus points. So if you're the Browns, that's the number you're going to have to beat. You're going to have to throw the ball to get there, and Harold Fannin feels like the best matchup for that. Him and Njoku, I think, are
Yeah, I was gonna
fine
say,
plays in deeper leagues, but yeah.
what do you feel about like? I mean, in joke, it seemed like it was going to be going Fannon's way from the jump, but he's kind of mixed back into the fold there.
Yeah, he
At
had a
least as
better
far
week
as
3.
targets, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would be more confident in Njoku than Fannin, I guess, for now. But I do think Njoku is probably a long-term trade candidate. We shall see about that. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think this is a good matchup for tight end. So take your pick.
cool. I agree. The
Cowboys.
Cowgirls, cool. They are
This is a
playing.
tough one. They're playing the Packers Sunday night. Packers defense has been elite all season. Nobody's really had fantasy success against them. Um, George Pickens, you're probably still going to throw into your lineup just because he's the wide receiver 1 on an offense that's looked pretty competent. Javonte Williams, I mean, should still get some work. Their O line has been good. They did just take a huge hit on that O line last week, which is going to be brutal. But outside of that, I don't love this matchup for any of them. It's not going to be a plus matchup for anybody, but you're still absolutely starting Jake Ferguson with that target share. That was absolutely ridiculous. He got 14 targets last week. Has seemingly been the guy for them. He's the tight end 1 in fantasy right now, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon with CD out for probably a month. So, I mean, you're still like auto locking him into your lineup regardless of who your tight ends are. I still think Javonte Williams should get some run. Outside of that, Pickens is a kind of a shaky flex option, maybe a good flex option, but I'm not super high on this offense this week.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm pretty much yeah. You're starting you're starting Pickens if you're in a kind of weird spot with wide receivers, but I know a lot of people like Pickens at least after the draft for standard leagues, probably either a bad flex or like the top of your bench wide receivers. So this is probably a good week to just stay off him, even with the CD stuff going on. At least in my opinion, I'm going to be staying off of him. So
Yeah, it'll be a kind of a case by case basis. I think there's no problem if you want to start him this week. I mean, he could still easily score a touchdown and have some big plays, but if you have better options, you don't need to force it this week. That would kind of be my takeaway. Broncos here. Cortland Sutton obviously had a gigantic week. They are playing the Bengals on Monday night, like we talked about earlier. This to me feels like a giant J.K. Dobbins game and potentially even an R.J. Harvey breakout. Basically, whichever running back is out there on the field, I think is going to have a giant week. Cortland Sutton should even have some success early on in this one. As long as they're passing the ball, he's going to get fed, him and Troy Franklin. But to me, my biggest takeaway in this one at home on Monday night, start your running backs that are playing on the Denver Broncos.
yeah, I would pretty much say the same. I think it's going to be a run-heavy script. Cortland Sutton, I think things will pick up for him, despite maybe not seeing. Last week was good for him actually, but I think just overall the first 3 weeks probably hasn't been exactly what managers were expecting from Sutton. But I think that should pick up. Bo Nix's production should pick up, but I do think largely they're going to be playing from a lead. There's going to be a lot of rushing in this one. Definitely starting J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, I'm with you. Lions here, same thing as the Ravens. Don't have a ton of info, but they're taking on the Browns. Pretty much a nightmare matchup for running backs, but their scheme is so good that you're still going to be starting both of those guys. Montgomery, probably if you're in a deeper league in a flex spot. Jameer is an auto start regardless of matchup. I wouldn't overthink it too much, but it's not the matchup you want if you're a Jameer Gibbs owner. Amon-Ra should have success against any team. He's proven to be pretty matchup proof. He's been elite. And Laporta, you're still probably starting. He's been a little bit underwhelming so far this year. But hopefully he can get back to a spot where he has some fantasy value here. Maybe he finds his way into the end zone, even in an ugly game. I think they're still going to score a couple touchdowns, 20 plus points, and hopefully your guys find their way into the end zone. But nothing else really to touch on. Offense still looks great. I think the downfall people predicted after seeing them in week one was very overestimated. They've been great the last 2 weeks. You're still starting your guys, just not in the greatest matchup.
Yeah, I pretty much just echo everything you said with these guys. Not a ton to touch on here. The Baccas, yeah, tough loss for them last week. I mean, it was by effect of poor play, a ton of sacks, just good defense from the Browns, a couple injuries on the Packers side of things. Generally, though, I mean, the hype was deserved after the first 2 weeks. I think that was just sort of a fluke. I'm still big on the Packers this year. Big on Jordan Love this week, I think, too. He should have a decent game. Pass defense is really bad over there. So Love should probably just be able to like rip it like he normally does this week. Matthew Golden, kind of in the same vein, should probably be good as the long option this week for Jordan Love. I kind of expect a touchdown from him. There's still banged up wide receiver room over there. Got a little bit more juice even in that low scoring game as a big play threat against the Browns last game. So I like Golden. What about you, Grant?
Yeah, Golden's one of my favorite plays of the week. His line sitting at 40.5 receiving yards. He had 52 last week, but just seemed to be a more consistent member of the offense, and that is shown by the first read percentage. Wasn't in the top three last week or week 2 and week 1. He was at 14%. Last week jumps all the way to 22%. That should be pretty consistent going forward with Jaden Reed out. I don't expect that to change anytime soon. I'm also absolutely starting Tucker Kraft this week. I think it's a great matchup. And I think if they're able to score enough early, the ground game should be able to get going too. So Josh Jacobs is set for a big week as well. Basically just starting all the Packers this week, namely Golden, Kraft, and then obviously Love and Jacobs. But Golden's a guy I like a lot this week.
Same.
Heading into Houston, Texans 0-3. Not the start you would have hoped for. This is a must-win game at home against the Tennessee Titans, a game that you absolutely have to have if you want to have any chance at creeping back in this division, especially with how the Colts have started at 3-0. Like, now's the time to start making some progress into that lead if you hope to have any chance. You're obviously still starting Nico Collins. Titans defense has been decent, but it's not been quite as good as I think imagined. I hate this running back room. It's just kind of gross. I think Woody Marks is going to start to see more and more carries, but I still have to see it for a week before I'm throwing him into my lineups. Maybe he's a guy you take a stab at for pick'em lineup, but I'm not throwing him into my fantasy. What?
Set on not starting Chubb either, for sure.
Agreed. I'm not starting either of these running backs. I need to see it for a bit from Woody Marks. Chubb will never be my lineup again. Nico feels like a must-start guy this week. It has to have it. Christian Kirk's target share was pretty nice as well over there at 8 targets and 20.7% of that first read. CJ Stroud just looked gross. Nobody was going to have a super fantasy relevant day there. Obviously Nico did, but it would be tough to find one with that Stroud performance. He just wasn't on his A game at all. And it's kind of been that way for a while now. So time for him to pick it up. I think this hopefully is a game in this offense. And I like Nico Collins this week.
Yeah, pretty much the same. I mean, I'm not super passionate about anybody besides Nico Collins, who's a must start every week on this team. Going into next week, the Titans defense hasn't really looked like horrible or anything, and the Texans offense by comparison has looked really bad. So not big on this team. Start your Nico Collins.
Agreed. That's about it.
Maybe even start your bench QB at this point.
Yeah, that's about it. The Indianapolis Colts have been one of the more fun watches in the NFL this season. They have a matchup this week against the Rams, definitely their toughest of the year so far. I think this is probably where the Colts take their first L. Daniel Jones is a guy that I'm starting in all formats right now, though. Same with Tyler Warren at the tight end position. Jonathan Taylor, obviously, is a top 5 running back, regardless of matchup. He is the number 2 overall player in fantasy right now and the number 1 running back. So you're obviously putting him in your lineup. He's just as confident as you could be in a guy right now in his current form. In terms of these pass catchers, unless you're in like a very deep league, I don't know that I'm necessarily starting any of the receivers this week. I mean, if you need a flex or something, Michael Pittman can absolutely be that. But just looking at this chart, you can see how hard it is to see which receiver is going to be the guy. It's a lot of Tyler Warren. He's the commonality in all 3 of these charts. He's had a significant role every week, and he's obviously a guy you're still starting now. But whether it's Pierce or Downs or Pittman, it's just hard to fully say. So I'm not the most confident starting any of these guys on a week-to-week basis, but they're all capable of a big day. So if you need a flex or something, I'm cool with that. But outside of that, not my favorite receivers in the world just because of the randomness.
I'm actually decently big on Michael Pittman this week. I think he can have a decent week. I think it's like a pass heavy, probably a pass heavy script from the Colts here. At least it'll be close, competitive. He'll need to pass the ball to both Warren and Pittman here, I think. Plus the Rams corners, are a little bit iffy. So I think Pittman can kind of expose them there. So, if you're leaning between him and another kind of similar flex piece, I actually personally don't mind Pittman.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, I guess if it was like between Pittman and Pickens or something, they seem like a
Yeah.
similar tier. Like I would maybe lean Pittman, but
That's a good comparison.
But yeah, I just think they're targeting so many different guys. It's hard to get like a full read on it, but I would still feel decent if he was in my flex for sure. Jags here, gross. I mean, actually not a bad team. They're pretty good, but obviously that first read percentage in week 3 is not what you want to see if you're a Brian Thomas Jr. owner. That was kind of after all the fuss was made after week 2 with kind of his effort level and things like that. And then his first read percentage goes down. His targets go down. Parker Washington receives 10 targets, which is wild. He was obviously a guy that had some fantasy relevance last year, but that was kind of before Brian Thomas Jr. hit the ground running. This week, they take on the 49ers, whose defense has been good. Obviously, they just lost Nick Bosa for the season. That's a huge hit for them. But their defense is still good enough. Their run D's been good. You're still starting Travis Hunter in your flex if you have him. Travis Etienne in your flex if you have him, just based on the amount of carries he's receiving, but not a great matchup for him really. Bishal Tootin looked good, took the goal line carry away, which is kind of a big deal in a game that might not have too many scores in it. So that's something to keep an eye on. You're still starting Brian Thomas Jr. Unfortunately, you're not going to trade him. There's not much you can do. He kind of just has to be in your lineup until hopefully he figures it out. Parker Washington, got to probably potentially add and keep an eye on, but not someone I'm like starting or throwing in my lineup right now. But it's about all I got.
Yeah, I'd pretty much agree. I think we're going to see a lot more of Tootin as the season goes on, something we've kind of maintained here. LaQuint Allen, kind of surprisingly high snap share too, but I think ETN, you should probably get your juice out of him while you can, because I think that probably he's not going to be as relevant by the end of the season, probably not startable in my opinion, but also probably not the best week, like you said. So, I mean, all that to say, basically, I just think the running back room is kind of up in air and Tootin should be taken over here.
Agreed. I think this could quickly become Tootin's backfield at some point as the season goes on. Moving on to the Chiefs, who are playing the Baltimore Ravens. Primetime game on Sunday. This chart definitely showing that Tyquan Thornton has taken over a bit. You've seen that first read percentage stay the same through 2 weeks. Those charts look the same, so maybe we'll just discard that. But obviously, the first read percentage going up in week 3, made some huge chunk plays in that Sunday night game. Seemed to be a deep threat that Patrick Mahomes really trusts, which is an important thing in an offense like the Chiefs run. Travis Kelce looked bad. You're still probably starting him unless you are a guy that took like a young tight end to go with Kelsey and you have Tyler Warren or something, I'm officially moving over to the Tyler Warren side of that. In terms of these pass catchers, if Xavier Worthy plays, I like him in a game that could potentially be high scoring. He's a guy I would probably start in a flex in a deeper league just because he's coming off of an injury, first week, high re-injury rate. Like I wouldn't fully put my neck out for that quite now.
I don't even mind flexing Taekwon this week, really. The
Yeah, I
Ra-
mean, he's kind of a boomer bust guy in a game that could be high scoring. I like that. I think there's some upside there. He got 9 targets. Hollywood is just kind of mid. Like, there's nothing I'm really super excited about, and I'm not starting any of these running backs against Baltimore. I mean, super deep leagues or whatever, or if you just don't have many other options, Pacheco you can still throw into your lineup, but 10 carries compared to Kareem Hunt's exact 10 carries is just not what you want to see. I think this team is not going to be the most fantasy relevant until we get guys like Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice back. For now, if you don't have a better option, throw them in. But if you do, I would look elsewhere probably.
Yeah, I'm going back to Taekwon, because the Ravens just tend to give up a ton of deep shots in games, which is why I think he could have a chance at being a sneaky flex this week. I mean, it's not super sneaky because he's kind of been the first read target for Mahomes here since last week, but Kareem Hunt could also be sneaky. The Ravens have been giving up like a sneaky amount of scores to backs so far this season, and he can definitely find the end zone. So like, I could totally, they put him on the end zone too, like in goal line situations. So I could totally see him being fantasy relevant for a second week in a row here, like from a flex perspective. Yeah.
That's totally fair. I could totally see that. I think that's a valid take on this one. Moving on here, though, we got the Rams who are playing the Colts, as we touched on earlier. Puka is a guy you're going to be starting with the utmost confidence every week. We don't even need to touch on that. 15 targets is just insane. I think if you could go back in the fantasy draft, he has a very good chance of going in the top 4 of most fantasy leagues. Devontae Adams has a ton of trust from Matt Stafford in the red zone in this offense. He seems to be like their primary touchdown threat there. So he's a guy I feel really good about as a wide receiver too, or as a flex. Matt Stafford's ability to sustain 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers is pretty insane still at his age. Both guys are super relevant as ever. Kyron Williams in a potential positive game script. Love him this week as well. I think he should get some good work. And that's about it. Don't love the tight ends. Don't love any of the other deeper plays. Even Stafford himself has been somewhat relevant, but is not like a fantasy volume guy you're really going to find because Kyron does take some of those goal line carries and things. But both wide receivers and Kyron you feel great about. That's about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on all those points. Blake Corum, kind of a little bit scary. I mean, he's looking decent.
Yeah, he did get 8 carries in a game that I don't know when those carries came necessarily. We can do some more research on that, and maybe
he
he'll be a
looked
guy in
pretty
our
good.
waiver. He
Yeah.
did, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that was pretty much my only note besides on what you touched on there was the Corum.
Probably a guy to monitor in waivers. But him getting 8 carries in a super close game against Philly is like something to be aware of, I guess, and maybe
Behind
picking
like
him up in deep leagues. Yeah.
Yeah, like McVay rushes the ball a ton with one running back. Kyron's had some
Yeah.
injury problems, so he's always a handcuff to keep your eye on.
Yeah, agreed. I like that. I like that shout.
Cool. On to the Chargers here, who are playing. Who are they playing?
They're playing the. Where's this game? They're playing the Giants in New
Cool.
York.
Yeah, so the Giants have just been terrible. I mean, the Chargers got it done last week against this Broncos squad. What do you think about this one? I mean, I think I like Quentin Johnston in this one because the Giants gave up so many big pass plays on top of their running game working against them. So
That's kind of where I was leaning as well. Outside of that, I think Amari and Hampton should have a giant week. The Giants' pass rush is really good, so Herbert's going to have to get the ball out quickly, which also makes me like a Keenan Allen,
Hmm.
who's going to run some of those intermediate routes. Hopefully, you see some more from Ladd. If you're a guy that used your third round pick on him as well, it's not been the greatest start to the season just because of how spread the ball has been. And
Yeah.
that's evident based on the first read percentage as well. That's does a really good job of visualizing kind of how this wide receiver room has been. It's those three guys. Nobody else is relevant, but
And
those three guys are splitting it very evenly.
if you're a QJ fantasy owner or Keenan Allen owner, and you're ecstatic kind of about how these charts are looking right now, especially QJ. Like I don't think anyone
Mm-hmm.
expected that coming into the season. So
No, I completely agree.
do you think that's going to be like a consistent thing? I mean, from what I've seen so far from Herbert, I feel like it's just going to be kind of another wide receiver room that's going to be he's going to target everybody kind of similarly to Josh Allen, like he's one of those guys. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been given a reason to think otherwise as of now. Like they're playing well, they're 3-0. There's no reason to change things up. As long as teams are kind of giving them those looks, there's going to be weeks where each one of those guys is the wide receiver one, but like they're still all pretty fantasy relevant. Like they can all eat in some ways. If Quentin Johnson gets a 50-yard touchdown, he's already fantasy relevant if that's his only target. And Keenan Allen, if he gets 7 for 60, is relevant. I think there's room for all of them, and they're all going to have their weeks where they seem to be the guy. Hampton is immediately a top 10 running back for me after the Najee Harris Achilles. There's nobody else that's really going to compete for any carries of note. Son Haskins is there, but he's not a threat of any kind to me. And Hampton has been great in the pass blocking game for them all year, and finally got the volume on the ground last week and looked fantastic. So, and he got 6 targets, caught 6 balls. That's huge for him. Him running routes is giant, and that should be pretty consistent with Najee out. So, huge uptick for him. Big fan of that. Moving on to the Raiders
Ooh.
taking on the Bears. Bears defense isn't anything spectacular, so I think this should be a big week for Brock Bowers. I expect this first read percentage to change a bit, and hopefully return to its normal state with Brock being the number one guy. Trey Tucker is kind of not, in my opinion, not super fantasy relevant, but he's a guy that if you're dealing with a bunch of injuries or you're in a really deep league, he is going to have huge boom weeks. He's also going to have weeks where he puts up like 3 fantasy points. So not a guy you can trust, but if you're looking for huge upside, he's definitely that guy. He's the deep threat in this offense. Deontay Thornton getting this big of a first read percentage is pretty crazy as well. Got 4 targets. Jacoby Myers only 4 targets this week, which is not great, but he's proven enough throughout the last year and a half that he's a very high floor guy. He's still a guy I'm starting this week. And I'd be really excited about Brock and Jacoby with a very positive matchup against the Bears. Genti looked better, got some more carries on the ground, which is good, and broke some tackles. He's been breaking tackles all year, but his yards output looks pretty good last week. No targets, which is bad. Like he's going to have to get some relevance in the passing game, I think, in order for him to be a real guy you're monitoring and living up to that early second round pick you probably used on him. But this is another week where I think it'll look even better than it did last week, and hopefully that begins to snowball here.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was going to bring up Gianti. I think it's a good week for him. The Bears have been getting beat up by backs. I expect him, at home to probably run his best game of the season so far this week. Hopefully startable, especially if he gets into the end zone here. But yeah, I mean, I would second kind of what Grant was saying. I'd be cautiously optimistic about Trey Tucker. I mean, I would probably even a little bit more. Like, I think a lot of people will just write it off as sort of a giant boom week, but he's been pretty consistent as far as, snap share, first read rate goes through the season so far. And it's like, it's interesting because there are like a good amount of rookies, young players brought in at the wide receiver position, but it's just been Trey Tucker all over the place so far. So, I mean, I expect him, especially with like Jacoby looking a little bit less desirable, to maybe see, especially after such a huge week, a little bit or at least consistent production like this. Like seeing the same snap share, probably similar amount of targets at least in a positive game script. But yeah,
Agreed. I think it should be a fun game for pass catchers in this one, kind of all across the board. I think the Bears pass catchers will do well as well. On to your Dolphins. What's been your takeaway so far?
they suck. We got to fire everybody, and that 8 chan. I mean, This week, in all honesty, they played better than I thought they were going to against the Bills. Tua didn't
Mm-hmm.
show any fantasy relevance at all, but he showed that he could get it to the receivers, I guess. I mean, Jalen Waddle, not really.
Yeah.
That was barely anything. But, I think the receivers, it's a little bit of a bright spot if you're like their fantasy owner. Still not the value you drafted them at, but
It hasn't been a
getting better.
disaster yet.
Yeah.
They play the Jets on Monday night this week. Kind of a just gross game. Who knows? It's a hard one to predict. I wouldn't be like super confident in anyone playing in that game other than Achan. He's obviously like a top 10 guy, and he's going to be in your lineup every week. Tyreek Hill is still probably going to be in your lineup every week as a flex. And Waddle, you're kind of, depending on the matchup, you're putting him in versus taking him out. But Tua, you're not starting. That's about it.
Yeah. And I think this Bills game, just the first read percentage is really it is room. There's room to be optimistic with that. It's like you love seeing those giant first read percentage shares for Waddle and Tyreek. So at least Tua is like actively like trying to get the ball to the right guys. In a big game against the Bills. So I think there's some optimism to be had from a fantasy perspective. If you're a Dolphins fan like I am, though, I think our season's pretty much cooked.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think that's the right outlook to have. Vikings obviously looked elite last week in their first game under Carson Wentz against the Bengals. It was at home, and that was a very exciting performance. TJ Hawkinson looked better than he has all season. Justin Jefferson seemingly could have some value here, and they're playing in Dublin on Sunday morning here, early game Sunday morning football. Love Jordan Mason in this one against the Steelers. I think he should have a gigantic game, and as long as Aaron Jones is out, and even probably once he's back, but we'll have to see then what it looks like. But he's going to your lineup every week, and he's a very confident play. Is never going to be involved in the passing game, but that's okay when he'll probably get 70 yards and a touchdown on the ground most weeks. Last week, I think he had like 120 and 2 touchdowns. So that ceiling can be there on the ground. He's kind of like a Derrick Henry type play where the passing game is not going to be there, but if you get enough volume on the ground, it doesn't quite matter. Jefferson is going into all lineups, obviously, and Hawkinson kind of depends on your tight end room, but if he's all you got, you feel decent about it against the Steelers defense that's given up some points this year. Anything else? I feel like that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. Jay, I was just going to shout out Jefferson. It's going to be like indoor-ish vibes, and Dublin should be a fun one for him with Carson Wentz. But otherwise, I think you touched on pretty much everything.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's still yet to be seen whether Carson Wentz can sustain like a real full game of volume to Justin Jefferson. That game was just kind of like played on tilt the whole time, and then they were just pounding the ball on the ground. So yet to be seen, like if this game's close and we're kind of going down to the wire. Hopefully, Justin Jefferson's the guy. Patriots, not the most fantasy relevant team at all. A guy that I loved last week was Hunter Henry,
Mm-hmm.
and that paid off. You can obviously see in the first read percentage there. I think this should be another positive matchup for him. He's obviously a tight end you're starting unless you have like a really good one on your bench. I'm personally in some tight end premium leagues, and so he's even a guy you could start at flex if that's your situation. They're playing the Panthers this week, which should be a decent matchup. It should be like a somewhat close game, meaning that Drake May should have to throw the ball a good amount. Trevion
Yeah.
Henderson is kind of my main takeaway here. Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson looked pretty good on the ground in last game, but they both fumbled. Ramondre fumbled twice. I think that's probably going to lead to a permanent uptick in Trevion Henderson's role.
Yeah.
And he should get more of the work going forward just because of how involved he can be in the pass game as well. I think those guys will still probably get some carries, but I expect that to be kind of the beginning of their demise and kind of where Trevion Henderson sees some real volume.
Yeah, I totally agree with that Travion Henderson point. And I think it should be a good Drake May week as well. Like, I love to see him building that synergy with Hunter Henry last game. Young quarterbacks tend to lean on their tight ends, so love to see that. This matchup with the Panthers is pretty positive for him, too. Should be some pretty at least high volume offense on either side. He's going to need to pass, like Grant said. Could be fun, if you're in a desperate spot, even to go with like a Booty or something. If he's on your waivers somehow, great pickup there too, because he's slowly emerging as, the deeper threat favorite for Drake May. So yeah, I think it's a positive script for May. Kind of hesitant about starting really anyone else on this team, like Grant said. But if you're a May owner, decent week for him for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you. Saints, not a good team, but I kind of been a little bit impressed with Spencer Rattler as a
Mm-hmm.
guy. I think he's looked not as bad as kind of the scores may say. I think the roster is just pretty flawed. Olave is a guy that's getting the most targets in the NFL. He is currently number one. That's pretty obvious based on that 40% first read percentage that we saw in week 3. Um, he's out on the field for pretty much all snaps, and he's running a ton of routes. So he's a guy that you're starting and feeling good about if you're in PPR formats. Jawan Johnson,
Especially
same
against the
thing, 8
Bills.
targets
Like,
for a tight end. Yeah, agreed. Very positive game script for them. Should be throwing the ball a ton. I guess that's a negative game script. Should be throwing the ball a ton. Olave and Jawan are must-start guys this week for me. Don't feel as good about Kamara. He's not running the same amount of routes as he has when he was younger. So that's a little bit concerning. And the Bills' run D's been really good. So he's probably still a guy you're starting this week, but you feel better about him if he's your flex versus him being like your running back one. But pass catchers, huge uptick. Love him this week. Anything else, Jackson?
no, I would just say I agree with all the points you touched on, and that the Saints are actually have some fantasy relevant guys this year. That seems like it's probably going to last as long as Spencer Rattler doesn't fall apart here. So it's fun to see. Huge on Olave this week. So yeah,
Love it. Giants, Jackson Dart season. Uh,
big
kind of
week
one
from
where I
Scatabo last week.
Yeah, huge week. He's a guy I feel good about throwing into the flex, especially after Tyron Tracy hurt his shoulder a bit. His status is still a little bit up in the air. So Scadaba's a guy you can target in that flex spot, especially with 8 targets in the passing game. That's pretty crazy. Him and Jackson Dart seem to be pretty good friends, which is the least shocking news of 2025. I would be starting him in flex situations. You can kind of throw out this first read percentage in some ways. I mean, I think Malik
Yeah,
Neighbors is still obviously going to be the guy, but with a new quarterback, new situation, potentially a new scheme with a guy with kind of different abilities than Russell Wilson, I think it looks a little bit different. I think you
I,
could see some deep balls being thrown more accurately. I think Malik Neighbors gets involved early and often just as kind of a safety blanket, a guy that gets open. He's going to be a guy that a dude making his first ever start is going to be kind of just like looking at constantly, and if he's in trouble, just kind of trying to find him.
do you figure with Dart it's going to look more like the week 1 and 2 first read percentage, or more like this most recent weeks?
I would think week 1, right?
Yeah, I'd probably agree. I mean, I think at this point, I at least hope Dart is a little bit more pure, and that's kind of the way it tends to skew in that sense. So hoping it goes that way, especially for fantasy owners, neighbors owners, but it's kind of hard to say. I'm not huge on starting. I mean, Scatabo, I totally agree is fine outside of that. And neighbors just because of the volume, but I'd be hesitant to start anybody else this sort of game.
Yeah, agreed.
Um,
The Chargers have been good too, so in a game they're probably going to be trailing in, I think Malik Neighbors should be uh like 15 targets should be possible for him. I think like the line is probably like 12 and a half or something, but I
yeah,
expect him to get a ton of work. So that would be a big plus.
their
Um,
D line has been a little bit leaky too. The Chargers.
Yeah, it has. So maybe the passing game gets going a bit. Jets here, Garrett Wilson, gigantic first read percentage, huge target share, barely threw the ball last week, and he still found his way into 12 targets and 47 routes run. Played the exact same amount of snaps as the quarterback did, which is pretty crazy. That's the only time we've seen that across the board throughout this video. So he's obviously a guy that's going into your lineup. He's pretty quarterback proof. I'm starting him in any situation. Seems like Justin Fields could probably be back this week, so the offense will look a little bit different. But Garrett Wilson still must start. Not starting anybody else outside of Brees Hall, who plays the Dolphins this week. giving up a lot of yards on the ground. We saw how James Cook ate that defense on Thursday night last week. So feel pretty good if you're a Breece Hall owner. Outside of that, nobody I'm comfortable starting except probably Justin Fields if he plays. He's a guy I'd be decently happy with.
Yeah, I'm kind of concerned about the snap share as of late for Breece Hall. I think maybe we should see a bit of a shift in that once Justin Fields is back and things are a little bit more normal, though. But Braylon Allen could be fun, probably not from fantasy perspective, but from I'm sure
Best ball or
yeah
if you want to take a slip
prediction
on him or
strike,
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
take home,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I think that could be fun this week against this Miami defense that, like Grant said, was kind of hemorrhaging against the run. So yeah, let's move it.
Completely agree. Eagles here, pass catchers played a
AJ.
lot better in week 3. AJ in particular. Smitty looked good as well. He scored a touchdown too. So that's big to see, just to prove they can still do it. I was never super worried about that. That's kind of just what you're getting involved with the Eagles. There's going to be games where they take a lead early and they run the clock down the rest of the game. That's just kind of how it goes. But it's nice to show that AJ Brown and Devontae Smith still got it. This week, who are they playing again? They play the Bucks, which should be a pretty fun game.
Yeah.
The Eagles' defense is good enough where they're never really going to be in a shootout, but the Buccaneers are kind of that team that can put up points against anyone. Their offense has been fun. Love Saquon this week, obviously, and you feel pretty good if you have both these pass catchers. Devontae Smith will always kind of just be a flex for me this year. He's going to be somewhat touchdown dependent just based on how little they throw the ball, but feel good about AJ Brown this week. The Buccaneers have given up some pretty long plays so far this year, so AJ Brown feels like the guy that's best equipped to target that.
Yeah, I think
tight ends, Miles
the
Goddard
Bucks.
looks gross.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Oh, I was going to say the Bucks also run a ton of single high, which AJ Brown absolutely punishes, and obviously with Saquon in the backfield, that probably is going to press the Bucks to run that even more. So I love AJ.
Yeah, sounds good. That might be a potential pick 'em slip play then. Got to keep an eye on AJ Brown. The Steelers here, they were playing the Vikings in that game we talked about in Dublin. Vikings are pretty much a nightmare matchup for an offense. They blitz a ton. Brian Flores does a great job at mixing up looks. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is a very cerebral guy and someone that's capable of kind of breaking down the most complex defensive schemes, but that doesn't mean that he's going to have much success against this team at his current age. I would expect a ton of checkdowns to Jaylen Warren while Aaron Rodgers is pressured. He's not the most mobile guy, obviously. So I think if the Vikings send heat, which they obviously do, Jaylen Warren should get a ton of work out of the backfield catching passes. Outside of that, you're going to start DK Metcalf. Nobody else I feel good about at all this week, fantasy-wise.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to second the Jaylen Warren take. I think that's great. I'm pretty sure his receiving yards prop is sitting at like 21.5 right now, which I think is a smash.
That's a smash.
Yeah.
All over that this week.
Cool. And the Seahawks. Yeah, I mean, JSN should be an absolute smash this week. Cooper Kupp just hasn't really materialized it to what you would hope from him, but Arizona's secondary is pretty banged up. Obviously, they just lost James Conner, which might tighten the pace of the game a little bit. But I think it's a good opportunity for some get back for Cooper Kupp potentially. I think it's going to be a big game for JSN. Torrey Horton, I think, is probably even more. I mean, maybe I'll bite my tongue on this, but probably even more so of a boomer bust guy than like a Trey Tucker is. But I just don't. I wouldn't start him, even though he had that massive week last week, and the passing game script going on here. But what do you think, Grant?
Agreed. I think it depends on the Charbonnet role. I think he's still questionable. Seems like he'll probably play, which obviously puts a hamper on Kenneth Walker's role. But you're still going to start him if he's on your roster. JSN must start guy. He's a wide receiver 1 for me. And yeah, I mean, Torrey Horton definitely a boomer bust guy, but I like him more than I like Kupp, if that says anything. So
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think he is a guy that has more upside long term if you're in like a dynasty league or if you're in a league where you need to take a shot at someone. Like Cup is going to be what he's going to be. And I think Horton has more upside to be like an actual guy you feel good about long term.
Yeah, I agree.
Just because there's more unknown, like there's more world where he could succeed. These numbers are hard to even look at just because they were up like 24-0 before they even like touched the ball. Basically, they scored a touchdown on their first drive, then got 2 turnovers and just kind of like ran the ball in from the 1. So the routes run numbers look crazy with JSN
Yeah.
only running 16 routes, but that will obviously look different. I expect him to have a huge week. And Torrey Horton, you're not starting this week. You're not starting Cup this week, but I keep an eye on Horton. That's about all I got. Moving on to the Niners. You feel really good about Christian McCaffrey and Ricky Pearsall, especially while Jawan Jennings is out. Nobody else I love this week. I don't think they're super fantasy relevant, but you feel great if you own either of those two guys. McCaffrey is going to be a PPR scammer all season. 14 targets is insane. Back to like prime McCaffrey days where now, even if he doesn't score a touchdown, he has huge potential in fantasy. 17 carries and 14 targets is as much volume as you're going to find anywhere in the NFL. Pearsall looked fantastic. He was well over 100 yards. And this feels like a matchup where that could continue against the Jaguars, who have given up some points. They gave up a decent game to Nico Collins last week. So boost to Ricky. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey is going to be your running back 1, and I'm content ignoring everyone else.
I would agree. No nuts.
And we have just a few more here. We have the Buccaneers offense here. Emeka Egbuka obviously takes a huge boost after the Mike Evans injury. He's going to be out a couple weeks. Chris Godwin rumored to be returning this week along with Tristan Wirfs to the offensive line. Tristan Wirfs is a gigantic add, should help their passing game a lot and their running game. Bucky Irving is a guy I like against the Eagles this week. He's been very involved in the passing game when they've been trailing in games, which should be probably the case here. Rachaad White even might get some work out of the backfield if you find a receiving yards line for him around like 7.5 yards. I think that could be a good play in a game where they're probably likely to be playing on the back foot a little bit. But Egbuka, you're starting him in every situation. And Godwin, I mean, if you're desperate for a flex option, I think he could be good working out of the slot because he can avoid some Quinyon Mitchell time. But outside of that, I'm probably going to have to see it for a week before I start him. But you're starting Baker, you're starting Bucky, you're starting Emeka. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a decent game. Other than what you said, obviously, I agree with all those points. I think it's a decent week to elevate Cade Otton from your bench. He got 2 looks in the end zone last game, just didn't convert those. So, I mean, with Evans gone, like that's going to tilt the pace a little bit, obviously, stuff like that. But I think Otton is probably going to see a higher concentration of looks this week.
That is a really good shout. I actually like that a lot. That will be a play of mine this week. I remember last year when those receiver injuries were piling up, he got a ton of work. So that feels like that could easily be the situation here. Moving on to the Titans, our second to last team here. Calvin Ridley, I'm benching him this week. I don't care. They're
What
playing
about
the
Alec,
Texans.
though?
I'm benching them all. I'm benching everyone on this team this week. Tony Pollard can play. The Texans' run D isn't like anything elite, so he can still play with the amount of volume. He gets 16 carries, only relinquishing 4 of those, 2 of them to a receiver, and then 2 of them to Julius Chestnut, who I don't care about Julius Chestnut. Tony Pollard is going to be the workhorse here. Texans corner group is about as good as you can find in the NFL in the last 10 years. Kamari Lassiter and Stingley have been as elite as you can find, pretty much shutting down any wide receiver, and Calvin Ridley is not a guy that I think is really going to break the mold for me here. Looked bad last week, only 1 catch on 6 targets for 27 yards, a couple bad drops, looked a little bit disinterested. Not what you want to see. Alec's a good player and obviously a guy worthy of rostering and in deep leagues, feeling pretty good about, but this is not the week for him, I'm afraid. I think this game is going to be gross, but I would have the Texans winning like 17-3 or something like that. Chigakonkwo, if you're like desperate for a tight end, could be a play because the receivers I think are going to be somewhat taken out of this one, and the Texans linebackers aren't like anything crazy, so that could be a lean where you think Cam Wardis get the ball out pretty quickly and he feeds Chig. Outside of that, any contrary opinions here? Or are we fading this game?
I'm fading. I'm fading this. I mean, Pollard, like you said, is fine. If you're gonna, if I had to pick between Ridley and Ellick this week, I would honestly probably go Ellick just because of
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah the red zone work. But I'm not starting either of those guys. Like, yeah, I agree.
Hell yeah. Moving on to Washington here. We'll have to see if Jaden Daniels plays. He's still questionable. But this could be a pretty fun game, I think, if he does play against the Falcons. Potential to be decently high scoring. Washington's defense, I've not been impressed with this year, but the offense looks pretty good. So potential for a shootout, get right game for the Falcons offense and Washington here. The Falcons just gave up 30 points to the Panthers. So hopefully we get a pretty fantasy relevant game here. Chris Rodriguez got a ton of carries last week, which I think a lot of people kind of expected one of him or McNichols to get some work just based off the Eckler injury. Like Bill wasn't just going to like automatically get all those carries. They were going to go somewhere first. So Chris Rodriguez appears to be that guy, and a guy that you're probably not starting unless your league is like 14 teams and you need a flex or something. He's a guy you could think about. I wouldn't hate it this week in a game that I think is going to be pretty high scoring. McLaurin questionable with like a hamstring or a groin type injury, some sort of tissue issue. I like Zach Ertz in this one. I think he's probably the guy that gets the biggest volume there, and Debo. Both of those guys I feel great about, and I'm putting them both into my starting lineups. Unless you have like elite receivers or elite tight end, like I feel really good about those guys being consistent flexes, and Ertz being a starting tight end in this one in a potential shootout. I like the offenses in this one. It's just kind of hard to predict outside of those two.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm gonna like operate under the assumption that it's Mariota, and I still even agree with you that Debo is a great start this week. I think that's a great option. I like the Ertz shout as well. What do you think about like starting Mariota this week if you have
I
him?
like it. As
Yeah,
you were saying that, I think I agree with you. Total in this one is 44.5, which is decently high. I think that could even be a game that goes over just based on kind of what we've seen in the near future, recent future. Uh, I like Marcus Mariota in this one as well. I think if you don't have like one of the top 7 or 8 guys and you're deciding between like Mariota and I don't know, even like Matt Stafford in some ways, like I would probably lean Mariota.
yeah, yeah. I like that take. Cool. Well, I think that's all, right?
Yeah, that is our last game. We made it. We'll find a way to maybe condense this a tad in the future, but I think it was a good first look at it. And hopefully you guys learned some stuff and found some plays you can exploit. Stay tuned for some short form content where it'll be a little bit easier to digest and we'll give you some of our favorite plays in the pick'em variety for the week. But other than that, thanks for tuning in.
Download
Follow
PS.
Prediction Strike on everything. Download PS. Get your pick'em slips placed for this weekend. And peace out, y'all. We'll see you next week.
Peace.